This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.
Well, hey, everyone. Thanks for being here and welcome to this episode of When Science Speaks. Today's episode is brought to you by Bear Strategic Consulting in Washington, D.C., which helps scientists and engineers get funding, gain influence, and build relationships with their most important stakeholders, investors, policymakers, and the public. It is such a great pleasure to welcome Adriana Vela to the show today. Adriana is a multiple award-winning market and technology trends expert, strategist, entrepreneur, and certified business and leadership coach who's at the forefront of innovative technologies and scientific breakthroughs. For 3 decades, Adriana has been an ardent observer of the effects of disruptive change, paradigm shifts, studying behavior trends in both Fortune 100 companies and startup ventures. As a certified analyst in behaviors, motivators, and emotional quotient, her specialty is brain science, and she's developed human-first performance systems and conflict science solutions that incorporate proven neuroscience-based tools. Adriana has launched dozens of products, driven technology industry standards, led million-dollar initiatives, and defined new markets. As an entrepreneur, she's been quoted or featured in publications such as the Milken Institute Report, Pharmatech Europe, Hispanic Business, San Diego Magazine, and other places. Welcome to the show, Adriana. It is wonderful to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me, Mark. I really appreciate the invitation and opportunity to join you here.
Sure. And you've spent many years working with scientists, and we had a chance to talk offline about how to connect and work effectively with scientists. And, we chatted about how sometimes you need to channel your inner introvert, perhaps. And I'd love for you to start by talking about, you because you've moved from different career cultures and climates, and we're going to get to that in more detail in just a moment. But to sort of start out, can you share your experiences in working closely with scientists?
Okay, sure. Well, so yes, it's true. And now what I do want to make sure any listeners here understand is that I'm not generalizing people into extroverts and introverts and thinking scientists are introverts by nature. Actually, there are some who are definitely not introverts. But what this really boils down to is that I've always observed different behaviors, and because I've noticed behaviors regardless of the different environments or cultures where I'm at the time, I've observed that they are all very individual and specific. And when I was working together very closely with the Morris Cancer Center in San Diego and the medical school, I definitely had to adapt to that different culture. I'm normally more outgoing and we'll talk, but and say what's on my mind. But that is not something that I have to adapt. Now, from a leadership and professional development perspective, it is critical to exercise, what I call the mental agility and radical flexibility. This is what I teach them, because you have to see where are you at and be very aware of the other people around you. This will go into emotional quotient, which I know we'll talk about later, and your ability, to the extent that you can flex those muscles and be agile and flexible or adaptable, you are going to have a much better chance of succeeding. And that's what I did. And that's why I believe that my organization had a lot of success in that area.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Adrian. I want to go a little more deeply into that because you've really had a fascinating career journey so far, from being a developer in IT, then moving to the business side of your career journey, also in a research environment. Those are really three different and distinct cultures. So what can you tell listeners about how you were able to adapt? And also, and you just touched upon this, so I'd like you to continue and provide some more detail. And also, in addition to how you adapted, how do you teach people now who are shifting, migrating into different career climates, if you will?
Yes, certainly. So given the nature of what is going on in the world today, and really what has been going on for a while, which I'm speaking about how technology has moved very fast, and sometimes in some presentations I do about the future of work, I'll talk about how technology will never be slower than it is today. And because I studied trends, technological trends, and how these cause disruptive, so in particular disruptive technologies, and I would play it out in terms of possibilities. No, I don't have a crystal ball, and no, I don't have all the answers for the future, but practicing that and seeing a wider perspective allows me to be able to move from one to another. Now, there were definitely some triggers, and the triggers will differ. Maybe there's a major disruption in one area of the business. I mean, we've seen that all the time. When refrigerators were invented, they disrupted the ice,
the ice deliveries were no longer being made to the front porches.
Yes, exactly. So it is. It's always going to happen. Now, unfortunately, some people don't. They hang on to what they are comfortable with because something that is familiar tends to generate trust. And while it's a benevolent, natural brain function, you see, the brain actually is trying to protect you from risk of changing big things, or making different moves or adventuring. And in those that don't, in the IT industry, that was called the laggards, right? And then there's the mainstream, and then there's the the innovators at the far left.
Right.
And this was all from Crossing the Chasm, from Jeffrey Moore. But when something is really looking mainstream, why are you still hanging on to something that's old just because it's tried and true? Fortunately, I'm not built that way. I'm always, I'm very innovation focused. I always want to look at the latest tools and see how well they work. Not because I'm a gadget freak by any means, because there's a lot of technology I don't adopt, but because I see the potential in how it could be useful. As a leadership coach, I train leaders to think well beyond that and be able to observe what's going on, not just within their job and their family. They need to expand those fences and look beyond that. What could be triggering something else? And when you learn that, you will be able to make switches. So I went from being in IT on the business side to going to the nanotech side when I saw that the Human Genome Project was completed. Why? Because of the convergence of high tech and science, the scientific area, life sciences. So I thought, and that's where it's going. And I knew nanotechnology was going to be a huge trend because it was already in computers. So if you're aware of some of these things, in 2000, I think it was 2001 when the nanotechnology, the National Nanotechnology Initiative was signed. Yes. It was signed. It was started by Bill Clinton, and it was George Bush who signed it. And it was that was right after the Human Genome Project was completed. When I saw those two connections, I thought nanotech is the way to go. And I started my NanoBioNexus organization at that time in 2003. And it was not as a huge thing. It was the general public did not really understand it. And the press understood it even less and would only hype it, which was an issue for scientists.
Right. Overhyping, sure.
Overhyping, yes, which is part also of a bias that they have. It's like, they don't understand anything and they just, open their mouths. Right. Well, so I understand the need to do that. And I focused on getting information out where the rubber meets the road. And that's why I wanted to be closest to the scientists and researchers really working as and understand it with a critical and objective look at it, and then synthesizing it and making sure that the public was, understood it better. And so I like working on the fringes. And because of doing this for many years, I teach techniques like this to other leaders and professionals, especially knowledge professionals, on how to make transitions. Because once you do that, then you get comfortable, but they have to get comfortable with themselves. One point here, the reason why a lot of people also don't get comfortable, I mentioned the familiarity and your brain, trying to keep you from risks. The other is this is fundamental to the fact that people don't know themselves as well as they should. They don't know this is happening. They think it's my gut telling me this, and we can go into the whole thing about like the brain and the gut, but I know we don't have that time here.
yeah, another fascinating topic.
I'll stop for now. But the thing is that once they know themselves and they know how their brain works and how they make decisions, just having this awareness in understanding is hugely transformational.
Like you were saying, a bias towards sticking with what that's can be traced to the brain's function of one of the brain's functions of self-preservation.
Yes.
So this is working. It's interesting, even with respect to something like climate change, a lot of different politics and industry interests involved there. But, people thinking, well, look, we've been doing it this way, relying on fossil fuels, like we need to, and there's a constituency for that and a base of activists who want to continue doing that in business and so forth. But then at the same time, we're seeing already, and have been the last few years in particular, the negative effects on the climate from doing the same old thing. So it's,
right.
There's the danger. I mean, that's an existential threat, clearly. But as on more micro level, absolutely. It seems like, Adriana, your strands, you bringing together these strands of experience and even subject matter expertise too, from your various career stops so far on the journey that really help inform your overall more holistic look at what's going on, that can really be helpful, particularly when you want to try to make judgments about what the future may look like. I'd love to ask you about your working with scientists in the sense that, there's a huge difference when you're working in a corporate environment and an academic environment. If you're, say, a chemist or, a natural scientist, PhD, postdoc, or master's student, things like marketing are not necessarily top of mind when you're trying to come up with new discoveries in the lab at a university, at an R1, for example. But now you're in a corporate environment, working in the marketplace in general. And so, how do you deal with some of those situations that are kind of like culture clashes?
Yes. Well, every every environment, every workplace, no matter the industry, will have some culture clashes, which are just conflicts with between between workers, or between within a team or across teams and so forth. So that happens, and I've certainly observed that a lot. No matter, like I said, what industry it was. And don't get me wrong, it's not like I was always unscathed. Sometimes I would get in there too, and I would have my set of conflicts, because if I feel that I'm being forced to, let's say, assimilate and in a certain way, well, that's difficult. And some people just go with the flow, but where I can, I try to keep the perspective. So, for example, one time, I was working with a scientist, and this scientist outright refused to take talking points from me for a press event that I had organized during the Bio International Conference in 2017. So what did I do? Well, because I understand the business, I dropped him from the event. I just said, okay, that's fine. And his perspective was, well, I'm not going to have her tell me what to say. Like, you're not the boss of me.
Right. Right. Yeah. So true. People generally do not like to be told what to do, even if it's really in everyone's best interest that they do that. And so reflexive.
Yes. Well, there is telling what to do, and then there is just hearing it out, assessing it from an objective perspective, and then making a decision. But when that's the problem with, the biases that one would have, and there's so many different kinds of biases. There's cognitive biases. I mean, just the cognitive biases alone, there's like 12 of them. But there's, things like bandwagon effect. That's like the herd mentality, or confirmation bias, and so forth. So these are problems when they are left unchecked. And because we make decisions, and even important decisions, based on these biases, which by definition are not objective. So it comes back down to really ensuring that you understand yourself and how your brain works in order to have them be in check. And, understanding the fear, and making sure that if you have a bias, you stay on the driver's seat and you put the bias on the passenger seat. You acknowledge that it exists, but you don't let it drive.
I love that. I think that's a great way of explaining it. Thank you for that, Adriana. And actually, it leads very nicely into the next question that I'm thinking of here, which are some of the blind spots that you've experienced when it comes to working with research scientists in industry, and some of the shining examples, let's call them, of talented scientists who are both experts in their field and also successful in business.
Yeah, so I'll give you two examples. One that was somebody else, and then another that was my own, my own blind spots. So blind spots, by definition, are things that we do or we react to, sometimes as triggers, that we don't really know are there. Hence the name, we can't see them. But one time, this member of my team, he was an MD, PhD, obviously pretty brilliant person. And he was my PI for one of the programs that I had. And I knew that there was a little bit of communication difficulty in general based on his style, but he was the best equipped, to do that work. When it came down to actually receiving feedback directly of not just on collaborative behaviors, but also pushy behaviors, despite all his other talents, as the CEO and him being part of my team, I couldn't, I had to protect the contract, and I eventually had to let him go. When someone is not really willing to actually learn and understand their own behaviors, it's very, very difficult. Again, not to say that I do or I'm always perfect, because now I'm going to give you my example.
Sure. Yeah. No, well, you're basically giving us a great example of what you've been talking about, is really an understanding of our own, whether they're biases or ways of thinking. So this is great.
Well, one of the things that I didn't I was never really cognizant about, because I use these neuroscience-based tools and assessments that I now license, because they've got 35 years of research behind them. They're approved by the neuroscience community, and they're 100% bias free. So I know that, EEOC, and they've passed all the hurdles. So unlike a bunch of tools that are out there that do not have that behind them, I chose this, and I trust this one. And because of what I learned and the impact it had, transformational impact on me, I now use that with my clients. So I'll tell you what I discovered. I discovered that, good things like I'm in the top 2% of like 6 million people that are very receptive to new ideas and innovation, which stands to reason. And based on what I've done.
Sure, right. Your outlook, yep.
But what I also know is that is so high that the opposite end of that spectrum is your ability to work in a very structured environment. And when I'm talking about very structured, I'm talking about, let's say, like the government, like you do things only in this one way. It's very, cookie cutter. There's no sense of, no ability to expand, beyond, or very top down, hierarchical, and, whether it's a policy or a procedure or, constraints, I'm very poor in that area. So if I should find myself in that area, I have to work extra hard to make sure I acknowledge that and I'm aware of it. I was not, and therefore I would normally reject things, ideas, or things that I would read that conformed to that type of structure or culture. And when you translate that to other people, so people who were very structured, who are very comfortable in that type of environment, I would automatically have a clash. Before I came to understand and dive deeper on the neuroscience aspects of professional development, now that I used to be pretty guilty about that. It's like, well, you're not open-minded, or you're not coming, you're not with the times, or that kind of thing. And despite the fact that I was right, it still was not good in terms of working relationships, in terms of getting things done. And so I was definitely very guilty of that. Now that I understand it, and I understand why, because I went deeper and deeper, it is that, it has something to do with how I, grew up. And I came to terms with that. Coming to terms with that and getting to know that side of me is like a big weight lifted off of your shoulders. Because now you're like, oh, okay, I get it. It's not a mystery anymore. It's not I don't let the emotions take over, because I understand it. And this is why I dedicate myself to this now, because I want to be able to improve the human condition, because that's what it did for me. And it makes it's just very transformational.
I love it. I love that. And the basis of it and how you apply it and just that increase in self-awareness that I think we all can benefit from wherever we are, whatever types of relationships we're in, professional and personal relationships. And I want to ask you, Adriana, because you're an expert in spotting emerging trends, and all of us would love to get a handle on what might be just heading a little bit closer to the horizon. Of course, nobody has a crystal ball, as you've said, but I think it would be helpful for listeners if we could hear a bit more about some of the signals that you look for that enable you to, get some clarity, some degree of clarity on what may be just around the corner, for example.
Mm-hmm. Well, the short answer is actually very technical. So listen carefully, Mark. Here it comes. I pay attention. But seriously, clearly I don't claim to always be right. But the advantage that I have and other people have who find success or even thrive during big disruptions is the ability to be mentally agile and present. And because I'm very innovation focused, I'm always like, looking like the meerkat, looking to see like what's going on where. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I saw when I saw when the Human Genome Project was completed and followed shortly by the economic crisis in 2001. I was seeing that. I was in high tech, but I knew even before I ended up getting laid off, like tens of thousands of my
of
friends,
course,
that the future was actually in that convergence of science and life sciences and technology, and that's where I moved on to studying about nanotechnology. Now, I didn't know anything about nanotechnology, I mean, in terms of really what it was capable of, but I embarked on that before I even got fired. It's just like this light bulb went off when I saw that change, in terms of that convergence take hold. And that's where I went. There's the book, you're probably familiar with it, from John Spencer. It's like, Who Stole My Cheese?
Right. Yeah.
Right. So I went to look for new cheese. And I also saw this when the housing bubble in 2007 and that financial crisis, right? We could see the trend. I could see the trends about all these people buying a second house or a third house, and they're like, they're an administrative assistant for a company, and they had like a second house. So we know that this was like very overstretched. It's like, this is not sustainable.
Right.
And so we weren't we weren't buying into all that. Likewise with COVID-19, it started November of 2018, in China, but the minute it actually showed up in in the US, I knew, okay, everything's going to change here, and I knew it was going to spread because it was already. I mean, how fast it spread in China and Asia was only an indication of what was to come. So we knew it would end up coming here because of travel. And once it came here, I knew that in general the U.S. was not prepared mentally for it. And some of the smartest people would tell me, no, this will go away. It's not going to, take hold and I knew it was going to be much bigger. So in April of 2019, I I put together this webinar called Coronavirus PTSD. And I was already thinking about, okay, people need to be aware that this is going to have massive impact.
Right.
And of course, we did see that. This is why the healthcare crisis is so high, and, this is something that we need to be, to take seriously, because the stigmas of having mental health issues. Mental health issues is just is doesn't have to be like, oh, you're a lunatic, you have to be confined, or it's actual disease, like having high blood pressure. And you have to address it. And that's what I try to do.
It's so interesting, Adriana, because there are certain elements that I think of your professional and personal makeup that really help you figure out what may be around the corner. I mean, I think part of it is this innovative outlook and not being wedded to the way things are, and being conscious of that bias to listen to your brain telling you to just stick with what we've always had, which can, of course, lead to the type of denial that you described with COVID-19. And then, also because you've had such a diverse career journey and you've seen, IT up to, you were the one, you were working and actually implementing and developing it, and then moving to another perspective and then another perspective. And so these different, ways of looking at things and really knowing even where to look seem to really contribute to the ability of your ability to think about what might the future bring. I think a lot of times people give into that first impulse that you described and think, well, we'll just stay the course. It's worked, and they don't. That's this huge blind spot that you referenced before, because in some respect they think it's safer to do that, but of course it's not. So just really, really interesting. And as we wrap up here, Jenna, I'd love for you to share your perspectives on what you think we're going to see as we start to, I don't like to use the term, emerge from the pandemic, because I don't know if that's even, really maybe emerge from the original virus, but there are all these variants that are going to impact us and all these different things. So I'm always careful not to, sort of declare victory, because it's not over, but maybe a different phase that we're in as we talk right now, and what you might see in the future, drawing upon all these skills and attributes that you've got in your own makeup.
Sure. So you're looking forward, and the fact that we've gone through this huge disruption with coronavirus, it is a real it's a problem, which comes back to our human nature and common tendencies. So and what really comes into play here is something that's called neuroplasticity, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. So neuroplasticity, that refers to the ability of the adult brain to be sculpted and changed in response to experiences. So the first point is, yes, the brain has changed, and a lot of people don't really understand that, or are not very aware of that. And I think it's critical that they are aware of it and understand that further. And then the other part is that there's going to be other disruptions. This is not the first time. Coronavirus is not the first major disruption that we've had, and it won't be the last. Clearly, whether it's other variants or other things. But we have disruptions in life challenges all the time that changes, whether it's family issues, whether it's getting married, whether it's becoming a parent, or health issues that pop up, managing teenagers, moving, dealing with divorce, coping with bereavement. But do you know what's actually higher in terms of the percentage of impact on your life is?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's making a work transition.
Yeah. Interesting.
That it has 19% higher impact than all the other ones that I mentioned first. Now, coronavirus is on top of that. So because of a lot of transitions that have happened, people losing their jobs or looking for new ones and changing their perspectives, there is a lot of, I guess, what I call scrambled eggs out there. And as a healthy move and as a self-love, self-caring move, it's important for them to understand where they're at from a mental health perspective.
So,
does that help?
Yes, absolutely. Really, so much to this episode, Adriana. I am thankful that you were able to take time out to chat with us. And I know that listeners are going to find your perspectives and your specific examples and some of your guidance, some of your recommendations really impactful. So thank you for taking the time and being on the show today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure being here. And certainly, if anyone who listens has any questions or would like some help, I can be reached, through my website, adrianavela.expert, and I'm happy to help. That's my mission.
Thank
to
you.
Improve the human condition.
Thank you. And there's no higher calling, I don't think, than that. And all your information will be in the show notes for the episode, your LinkedIn and so forth. So listeners can check those out as well. Listeners, thank you for being along on this episode of When Science Speaks. And I hope we'll be back next time for the next episode of When Science
This is When Science Speaks, a new web series profiling innovative and interesting people working in science and technical fields, from academia to industry to the nonprofit world. We explore how to be a powerhouse advocate for science and your research, how to advance your career in meaningful ways that make you happy, and how to push back on the ongoing assault on science and other related issues of interest happening in the world.